Good morning. Today's date is October 23rd, and I'm interviewing Anna Marie and Gigi, and this is our second session of interviews we've done. Both of you reside in Asheville, North Carolina, and let's see, Anna, how long have you been living here? All your life?
I've been in Asheville all my life for 31 years.
Hey, and Gigi, you've been living here how long?
3 years, three and a half now. Well, almost three and a half.
Okay, practically a local. And my name is Rachel Muir, and I'm an interviewer for the Oral History Project, um, which is sponsored by the Blue Ridge Pride, the YMCA of Western North Carolina, and the University of North Carolina, Asheville, and Professor Amanda Ray. So in our last interview, we basically gave you a chance to talk about your story and your experience here in Asheville and your experience with um, the LGBTQ community and the community at large. Today, there's a series of questions that are part of the standard information we go through with our interviews. And if it's okay with you, I'd like to address those.
Okay.
So if you look at the categories of questions, the first one is about community support and services. Um, so here's the first question. Which LGBTQ organizations or other kind of organizations and groups have you worked with, benefited from, or considered an asset in your community? Any events in Western North Carolina that have played a formative role in your life?
For me, honestly, the first thing that comes up, if I was being really candid, which I am, the first thing that comes up is the social scene, like the club. It was a club long before, attending any rallies or like intentional spaces um, where queer people are being centered. That was the club first for me personally.
Hairspray?
Hairspray, club hairspray. So that was like my first kind of that hits this question, and where was that kind of space or environment that you encountered LGBTQ people the most often, was that same space. And so I think I came out around like 17 or 16 or 17. Um, and as soon as I turned 18, I was able to go to a club. And so before then, I hadn't had much interaction or involvement with other queer people at all. And if so, maybe it was kind of covertly, and, people not really comfortable with being out. And so, yeah, I didn't have a huge social scene growing up. And organization wise, it wasn't until really my mid 20s and like my late 20s that I started um, being kind of engaged with organizations um, like knowing Michael Harney and like the work that he would do around town. And so like I think that was like maybe even the first openly gay man that I crossed paths with professionally and personally. And so Michael's work with WNCAP here in Asheville, the Western North Carolina AIDS Project, was the first organization I think that I encountered that centered, not just all people, but specifically a lot of LGBTQ people. And that must have been around like 22 or so. And then here recently, I joined a leadership development cohort called SONG, Southerners on the Ground. And SONG really opened me up to my LGBTQ community. I don't think that I had ever had a close enough engagement with a trans person up until maybe a year and a half ago. So at like 28 or 29 is around the time that I first gone to a gathering that centered, I was part of this group called the Lord's Work. And so Song had this leadership development cohort called the Lord's Work. The Lord is an Audre Lorde. And work was spelled like WERQ or something. And so the purpose of that convening or that cohort was to kind of just get you more comfortable with being around other LGBTQ people, but specifically of color. So all my Latinx LGBTQ people, all my Black LGBTQ people are part of this this cohort, and it must be like 35 of us who we go down to Atlanta and we get together and we just start getting to know each other. And that's where I was kind of like, my mind was blown and shattered at how diverse those letters really are to LGBTQ. I had never been in a room with all of the letters. And so yeah, recently I experienced that, and it was really cool.
So when was that? Just this past year or the year before?
It was a little bit last year, and it was like a year and a half of a leadership development cohort.
Okay. And how did you discover that?
I was referred to it. Just being in close networks here around town, a lot of associates and friends are currently working with Song. And so when the Lord's Work opened up, it's specifically for Black and brown people. And so I guess the pool kind of gets a little small. If you weren't already working for Song here in Western North Carolina, then you might have easily been sought out to participate in this Black and brown leadership development cohort.
I thought it was just Black people, babe. I think it was just Black.
Was it just, were we
It was
all
just-
Black?
Yeah, just Black.
I guess some of the Song staff were Latinx, and that's where yeah. So actually we were all Black.
Just Black, gay, queer. Yep, it was just Black, gay, queer.
Thanks for reminding me. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm like, Latinx people weren't a part of it.
I
But
think
the
I'm
staff,
mixing up Song staff, and then
Mhm.
that leadership development was explicitly Black.
and then
Okay.
queer, well, what, gaycation.
Yeah.
You might also be thinking about gaycation.
Okay.
So if you started, and stepping back for a minute, if you started to go to Hairspray at 18, what year would that have been?
I'm 31.
About.
Like 2009.
Okay.
Yeah. I graduated school in 2008.
So you
yeah,
didn't sneak in,
2009.
before you were 18?
Well, no, did I go in before 18? No.
Is this a trick question?
I never cut school. I cut school one time, and it was on cut day, and I was like, man.
You had permission, or did you have permission from your mom?
Everybody gets permission on cut day. But nah, I didn't try to sneak in prematurely or anything like that. You just go to a house party for that. I had 7 siblings, and so everything was a house party to us. You didn't have to sneak into
The house was always full.
right. It's always a party.
No. How about you, Gigi? What were there organizations or events that you benefit from, and not just here, but in the past, that were LGBTQ or open to LGBTQ folks that were an influence or a support?
Yeah, I think I mentioned this in our first meeting, but the organization that I think most molded me in like a very severe way is called the Fresh Air Fund, and it's based in New York City. And its mission, well, it does several things, but it started in like the 1800s, where it wanted to take the city kids and take them out of the city to go to more like to the camp, to go to more rural spaces. And so I remember being a part of camp, and I used to go to camp since I was 8. So I had been at camp for a while, and the directors, like everybody was just free. Like you just were able to be who you wanted to be at the Fresh Air Fund. The Fresh Air Fund molded you and asked questions and allowed you to be like just who you are. And, you know, it's summer camp, so you kind of get to be who you wanted to be if there were no rules. And what I mean by that is like, of course there were rules, but like I personally wouldn't like act on being curious being so young at 8 years old, like with my mom, or at least I wouldn't, you know, do that. Um, and I was a part of the Fresh Air Fund all the way until I was at least 21, 22.
Wow.
Yeah, so from 8 to 22, like they have pictures of me when I was a little girl, and then as I grew up.
Were you a counselor as you got older?
Oh, I went through all of their phases. Yeah, I was a camper, I was a leader in training, I was a counselor in training, I was a junior counselor, and then I was a counselor. Um, yeah, and I was a part of I was a part of their career awareness program. So they helped me get a mentor to apply to college. Um, in my community, my mom only speaks Spanish. So applying to college, getting scholarships, all of that was up to me. So the Fresh Air Fund provided mentors, and I still speak to them to this day. I just talked to them like a week ago, Maureen.
Were there a lot of gay people at the camp?
Yeah, the director at that time, she's not the director of all of it. Her name is Alicia Scavera. Ugh, she is like the most amazing woman ever. But she is one of the first gay women to get married in New York when marriage was legal, when it became legal. And she got married at the Fresh Air Fund. And since
Wow.
there's been a little trickling effect of like new people getting married there. So yeah, everybody was like either gay or kind of gay, but or curious. You know, this is where definitely in psychology they mentioned that we're all gay, like that we're all bisexual or that we're all pansexual, right? That there is no, but that society molds us to go more into one direction, or that we preference one thing. That's definitely where everybody.
Could I ask a favor? Would you mind turning off that overhead light because it kind of can't always see your face?
I think we should go to the over here. Is that better?
We can see you now.
Yes, I can see you better. Thanks.
Yeah.
When you became a counselor, what was your interaction with the campers there? Do you think you provided that same kind of openness, encouraged that same kind of openness with the young people you worked with?
Absolutely. You know, the Fresh Air Fund was definitely a brave and what we used to call like a safe space. So it's just fun. Like we just the kids, some of the kids I like still have contact or communication with through social media. But yeah, absolutely. And I don't want to say like this is like a gay camp, because that's not, this is not that. It's just a place where, you know, we were able to leave the city and kind of like be free from the expectations that society and our families and our school puts on us. And it was just a space where we're able to imagine, where we can go run in the meadow and where we have no phones. Where you go hiking at the Fresh Air Fund is where I had one of the most magical experiences in my life, where I hiked the Appalachian Trail for 4 days.
Wow.
With a group of like teammates, and it's the most memorable experience that I've ever had, like one of the most memorable.
Where was that? What part of the trail?
By Bear Mountain up in New York. That's where we ended. And then where we started about the Fresh Air Fund is in Fishkill, New York.
Mm-hmm.
So it's about like an hour and a half from like the city. And then we ended in Bear Mountain. And I remember when we ended, it was so funny. We were like 4 days, stinky, hungry, you know, but happy, right? Because we're having such a great experience. And we had to hike through the pool of one of the cabin kind of lodging areas at Bear Mountain, because Bear Mountain is like one of those like touristy places. And we were with like huge bags, tired walking, and all you see to the left of you is a pool that you really just want to dive into. No, we couldn't. But yeah. So I would say the Fresh Air Fund is one of the most influential. It's what also gave me so much love towards like women and like learning more. I ended up getting my bachelor's in like women and gender studies. It's what definitely had me working in nonprofits. Needless to say that the Fresh Air Fund had one of the most impacts in my life.
Has there been an organization here that you've been active in or has been an influence or a support?
Very specifically with me being a gay woman?
No, not really.
Being a gay woman. No. With me being a Latinx woman, the organization that I work with, but not specifically with me being a gay woman. There is none. For me.
Because I know there's some organizations that historically have worked just with gay women or lesbians, and but I think their members and their appeal is largely for older women. So I was interested if you've heard of them or had any interaction with them.
No, Anna and I were gonna go to one of the gaycations from like Southerners on New Ground. But to say that they had it like that, an organization had an influence on me being a gay woman, not in Nashville.
Being part of the LGBTQ scene here in Asheville and Western North Carolina, has it brought you in contact with people of different class and race backgrounds? And how did that impact your circumstances or outlook? You mentioned that you met, well, maybe at that song meeting, you met people of all kinds of different letters, you said.
Yeah. Yeah, well, like growing up here, like I think I wrote a paper recently that was like me trying to figure out, what's my experience been like in Asheville for 31 years. And like I said, it wasn't really until like mid-20s that I started kind of just noticing, like who I am, what other kind of people are like, transplanted into this community. Otherwise, you kind of get familiar with who's who around town, like you just see the same old faces. And it's always been kind of, I grew up in Black communities, and then I see, white people in professional settings or grocery stores or stuff like that. But it's just been it seemed 50-50 up until like my mid-20s. And that's where like all of this kind of imbalance became like privy to me, where I'm like, oh, I didn't know there were so few Black people in the town. I thought it was 50-50. And so, yeah, so I just kind of got this awareness. And then, and when you peel back another layer past, race, me identifying as a gay woman, all the gay women that I knew growing up or were familiar with were kind of like down low, and my gym teacher was not a open gay woman for a really long time. Although everybody knew she was gay, and she's a really, really popular basketball coach here in Asheville, I don't think it was up until like maybe the last 5 years that she came out, well, not out, but like publicly, like she was named like the head men's basketball coach at a high school. And then it's like, all right, it's pretty known now, like this is a gay woman. But all the years that I grew up knowing that coach or that gym teacher, she never was really like, and so like I would see other Black women that I could identify with and relate to. And what I would presume to be gay even back then as like a, 13-year-old growing up, none of them were out and like proud about it. And so again, mid 20s, that's when I'm starting to see people, like really proud to be who they are and like coming out. I'm trying to think like, at 25, who did I know other than myself? Not a lot of people. I guess all that time went by and those older gay women got older, and the ones that would be my age, they were already kind of, I didn't have to come out in a really big way. My mom said, pick a side, and that was it. And then I got to just live my life, like out. And then everybody that I knew that would maybe be my age, they were the same. It wasn't, I didn't know a lot of people just trying to cover it up other than older Black women. They are not out and proud about it. I think they're still kind of skating by in this town, just kind of staying low, not causing attention to themselves. And that's it's been like that my whole life. So I didn't notice them, and now that I do notice them, they still keep a really low profile. And so I don't know a lot of people that I can relate to in terms of being Black women and being openly gay. Here's where it changes though. I know plenty of Black trans women who are proud of who they are. And that's because of my participation through the Lord's work. That's when I would meet trans women, Black trans women. And I didn't understand until, we all had to go around in a circle, introduce who we are, give our labels and pronouns and backgrounds and all of that. And I'm like, oh, those are Black trans women. That's cool. And then I would kind of just watch them. I was like, I'm mesmerized by like how the ones that I met were like very open and very, proud about who they were and are. Whereas the gay Black women back home, because I hadn't met any trans Black women from Asheville, but the gay Black women from back home were low profile, kind of still in the closet a little bit. And so I just felt like my whole world like opened up when I met trans women. And I was like, that's cool. That's different. And yeah, so not a whole lot to go on here in Asheville because it's very, but you break out and it gets opened up.
Here's a way to maybe to kind of frame the question is, so, and this for both of you, when, for example, did you become aware and meet your first gay men? Was that?
When do we become aware of gay men?
Yeah, or maybe when you had your first friend who was openly a gay man.
In church? Oh, and I'm that's a joke, but it's a little bit of truth. Like growing up in church, like I said, my grandfather stopped making me go to church at like 16 or 17. And then, but up until that age, like there were plenty of gay men in church. Like it was very apparent. And so I will honestly and jokingly say the Baptist church up until the point that I stopped going. They weren't my friends because they were always older, at least by 10 years or more. But, plenty of gay men in the church.
And then gay women, I noticed that you don't use the word lesbian. Do you prefer gay women as to say to lesbian?
You know what? I'm born and raised here. And so for a long time, I use the word they because it's just a Southern way to identify, them or they. And then I learned, oh shit, they and them is a non-binary. And so some people say, oh, you prefer to say they and them, or she goes by they and them. And I'm like, nah, I'm Southern, that's all. So gay is just still my kind of, my ignorance to all of the letters, and like in applying them appropriately. Gay is a shortcut. Lesbian is what I would probably use if I was writing some document about myself.
How about bisexuals? When would you first become aware or meet somebody who was openly bisexual or talked about it?
What about you?
Bisexual?
Yeah.
Why'd you say me?
I don't know.
No, I
I'm
was
like,
like, is there
I was-
somebody you're thinking about? that
I
I'm
was
not?
my first bisexual, so I'm like, what about you?
It's your turn.
Well, what's interesting, well, when you asked the first question of like, when have you noticed the first gay men? My mom's best friends were gay men. She had 3 very openly out gay men who were loud and proud, who like, and it was amazing. His name was Carlos, Diego, and Papi was the other's name. Like I don't even know his real name, but everybody called him Papi. And what's interesting is that when I was young, my mom and I would go with them to the Pride Festival, and I thought I was the coolest. It was like, yep, my mom took me to Pride Festival and in New York. So it's not like a little pride like here. No, it's huge. Exactly. So I was like, I thought I was the bomb diggity because my mom was so cool to take me. I just remember my mom collecting all the stuff and playing around, and we had all the gay flags. And anyways, so yes, that's when I seen gay men. I think that was like my first exposure to like openly proud gay men. And bisexuals, I guess when I first started growing up, I thought that I was bisexual. But that didn't really work with me. Like, I like how you just asked Anna, like, do you call yourself a lesbian woman? Like, Anna and I had this conversation as I'm recently having this conversation with my family, because they call me lesbian, but never has that came out of my mouth. I've never opened up to my family and say, hi, I'm lesbian. And I think the reason why I haven't done so is because the lesbian word has such a negative connotation. There's such negative association with being lesbian, right? In terms of like how society views this group of people. And I don't want to be I don't want people to see me and be like, oh, there is this lesbian woman, like promiscuous and highly sexual. You know what I mean? I'm like, that's not who I am. That's who you think lesbian women are, but that's not it. Like, I am a gay woman, and yeah. So that was the thing. And then bisexual, it wasn't until college that I learned about pansexuality. And
Yeah, I was going to
like,
ask you about that. When did you become aware of that term and that concept?
it was in college. I think it was because of one of my mentors in college. One of my mentors in college, and I remember someone saying like, I'm pansexual, and I was like, what is that? And they're like, it just means you like people. And I was like, that's what it is. That's me. I like people. I don't care for your private parts. I always used to say, like, I'm like, I don't care for your private parts. If a toy or I can give myself an orgasm or reach climax, why would another person not be able to do such thing? It doesn't matter what. Yeah, and I think this is more of a conversation we should be having with heterosexual people. That little penis does not mean climax.
No. How about the term queer? When did you become familiar with that? And not, it's interesting because when I speak to particularly to older gay men, they're not comfortable with that term. But how about you all? What do you think?
Other than television, like other than television, naming like, either in an insult, calling somebody queer, or when that show The Queer Eye for the Straight Guy first came out, like I would see the host and I'd be like, okay, that's queer, okay, got it. And it almost matched up with the insults that you would see in like movies where, some character would be like, condemned queer, like, and I'm like, got it. I think I see what America deems queer. And then I met a friend who I used to work with. And when I met them, she went by she, or they went by she. And
Sarah Brown.
I'll call her that. So I met this friend named Erica, who we worked together, and I really like Erica. Erica's this white person who is like a couple years younger than me, maybe like 3 or 4 years younger than me. And so we worked together, and the significance of like Erica being, you know, a white person was that we work with Black communities, and Erica came in kind of on the tail end of our operations and fit right in. And I was like, I really like how courageous she is and how she just, you know, like my students, my Black students would all kind of flock to her for, you know, really sensitive things to talk about. And I was like, oh, Erica, that's really cool. Well, fast forward like 3 years in, and Erica kind of starts to change like their appearance more and more. And they become more and more kind of, you know, dressed like me, which was like a masculine kind of presentation. And 2 more years later, I was under the impression that Erica preferred to be referred to they and them, and that they shortened it and started going by EJ, and that they identified as queer. And so they would constantly use this word queer. And I'm like, well, now I'm perplexed again. I'm like, I thought, you know, queer as in the guy on the television or the character in the movie, and now here my friend is saying like, you know, identify as queer. And yep, I still haven't gotten to the bottom of everything, but that was my first experience. And that was just not too long ago. That's been within like the last 6 years that, again, queer is now part of my vocabulary, but I do not understand it, so I don't use it often.
How about trans folks? Have you, when did you first encounter trans folks and become aware of them, and or have you? I know you have, but
You know, I have, and I'm in love.
Came back from her weekend retreat, and she was like, babe, trans women are so gorgeous. I just met these phenomenal people.
And their
And now
lives,
she just has crushes on these trans women.
they go through these rigorous lives, but put on like this really badass, not a badass, but like this really kind of like, you know, head up, chest out, like, you know, I'm still gonna, like, it's I don't know what to call it, but sure, there's this physical kind of like, I was mesmerized by most of the trans women that I met, and like just dumbfounded to the point where I came at home like, oh my God, Janina, like I don't know what to call myself. I'm just blushing, right? But the other thing that I shared with her was like, they shared a lot of stories about, you know, how this physical, you know, shell that they're in, you know, presents a threat too to their lives. And like they would share like these stories about like, some of them were like, you know, fuck love, I don't want to be in love. I'm like, why not? I was so innocently like perplexed that like most of the trans women I met said they don't want to be in love with anybody, or that they weren't in the pursuit that I was in terms of wanting to be in love. I just want to be in love. And they were like, oh, that's cute. That's not our experience. And I'm like, well, why not? And they would tell these stories about how, you know, in the pursuit of love, they would have these horrible experiences where, you know, the person that they loved and that loved them back would just kind of switch it up out of fear for their own lives or own kind of social status, and they would completely ditch them. And I'm like, oh, well, I never thought about that. So I'm like, anyway, trans women have really like opened up my world because of the stories that they shared with me. I'm like, like I thought we were all pursuing the same things, like this kind of fairy tale romance. And a lot of trans women said like, no, not really. I'm not looking for that, what you looking for. And I'm like, I didn't know that. I thought we all wanted it. But have you met any trans women like and gotten to like to know them, or like?
I think to say that I have trans, well, I think we would need to define what trans, because people who are like EJ identify as trans.
Oh, see, I didn't know that yet.
So when you're a gender non-binary, you're a transgender person. And so I'm like, if that's why I'm like, first we need to define, but if we're thinking about like very specifically, like a trans woman, very specifically a trans man, honestly, I'd have to say that it was very like maybe a year or two ago. And I would say it was a trans man who I met in Atlanta, who lives in South Carolina, who I met through work, and they came and had dinner with us.
Mhm.
What's his name?
Winston.
Winston. And there is a little bit of like fear, and there's only fear for me to do something or like to say something that's wrong or to hurt them or and like not my intention. So I am like really like hyper vigilant, and like knowing who I am very often I don't think when I speak. Like I'm like,
She's so fast.
and then it's not till afterwards where I like see facial expressions or something and I'm like, oh shit. So it's the only reason why I'm I think I would need to like someone would need to trust me and know that I'm in this process. Like even EJ was a big person of EJ was one of somebody I worked with until literally EJ is someone we went to Colombia with in February. So EJ has had definitely some influence in my trans experience.
Okay.
Not very much.
Not to talk about my stories, but I remember one time I was at a meeting and I met a bunch of young trans men. I just felt like they had it all. I mean, they were like brothers, you know, but with like none of the fighting or any of the competition. So they seemed like they had the best parts of men and women, and they were, you know, like really energetic, and they were pals. But I was really impressed. So, but interesting people. Definitely opened my eyes. So,
I'll second what Gigi said too. Like I won't call it it's not so much fear, but more so like a lot of respect for like people. Like I have so much respect for people that, you know, I don't want to have any opportunity to hurt them, right? Or to just, you know, have I'm cool for some mistakes, but I don't want you to leave that, you know, quick encounter or that long engagement and be like, man, Anna hurt me. And so same, I'm like, nah, I don't want to do that. I'm in a learning process, and it's probably gonna be lifelong because there's so many different people out there, like, and who knew? I've been here my whole life, like. So yes, so at some point there's gonna be some question where I'm like, I don't want to offend anybody. I got it. And so yeah, we do have that like reservation about like not wanting to cause any harm. When we identify, you know, within these letters ourselves, it's just that I'm so ignorant to, you know, a lot that I know we can hurt somebody. And so we still trying to learn and tread with caution.
okay.
I also think about, like, as we're speaking, I'm like, about the trans people we have met, not been able to tell. Like, there are some, you know what I mean? Like, and so that also comes to mind, right? Like, there are literally people that we've encountered. And, you know, that is, I just met this person. I didn't meet a trans person.
Yeah, there's particularly among people my age, you know, it'd be dangerous to be out as a trans person. Like, I'm 68 years old, and so so people who are contemporaries of mine who trans men or trans women, they just, it was just not possible for them to be out. You know, they couldn't keep jobs. So it's that's changed a lot. But yeah, I probably met trans people before I knew it.
Same.
Right, that's what I'm saying. Like,
Yeah.
So, do you know any older trans people?
yeah, baby.
Who?
You always talk about him and you say that he's still, or I don't know if he definitely trans.
Who?
And they like dress in they safe sex. They always have condoms, and you talk about him going to Hairspray and then him going to his 9 to 5, but always showing up to show
Michael?
the same. Yeah,
What about Michael?
he always wears. Wait, not
Michael's
Michael
not
with
trans.
the with the.
Yeah, the
no,
rubber
no,
man.
no, not him. There's
Okay.
I thought there's
Somebody else that works with Michael, maybe.
Whatever.
No.
Well, there's so many people that she knows. I mean, like she's been here her whole life, and
I don't.
only very small town of people. But you've introduced me to someone, and you talk about them in your younger days about being someone who's influenced you, being a gay woman. It's this like very beautiful man who like wears beautiful, like he has a beard, and then he has.
Who is it?
You know who I have not talked about, as I'm over here describing the person you are, but over here not describing somebody who I really care about.
Ooh.
There is a person who used to be called the Queen of Queens in New York City. Then I'm like, now that's, I think, my first exposure to an openly out trans person. Yeah. And the Queen of Queens is this beautiful person from Colombia. And he used to be around from where I grew up in New York. He was a lawyer in the 60s, and then he moved to New York. And then he started, like, he had a parrot, and the parrot would be in his head. Then he had a dog, and the dog would be pink. And he would always be wearing these beautiful garments, and everybody loved him. Well, most people loved him because they ultimately murdered him like a few years ago. And sorry, not to be like reality of stories. But that is my first exposure.
That's right.
Yeah, and it's so interesting. And I'm over here like, because I bought this tarot cards, and they gave me a painting. I don't know where it's at. They gave me a like this coloring book that came with the tarot cards. And interestingly, when I was passing through it, I looked at it and I was like, babe, I know them. I know this person. Like, I have had interactions. I have pictures with them. And yeah.
Huh. The Queen of
Queens.
Queens.
To talk about.
That's right. I'm like, right, the Queen of
Queens.
Well, were there elders that you've run into? And by that, I don't mean just people, but for example, movies or books or people in the public eye who influenced you, that sort of mentored you in some way, even, through their writings or through their activism. Or so were there any books or films that influenced you and had made you have a different vision of what the community's like or of your own life?
Influence. I mean, elders that influence.
You mentioned Michael. I know Michael.
Well, yeah, Michael, because just all that energy that they use to come out into the community. Michael used to come teach my students about like safe sex and I mean, there'd be a lot of horsing around and a lot of straight guys who would, possibly, be saying some little jokes or whatever, just being rude, not embracing it. But I just always appreciated the way Michael carried himself in any space. And I was like, wow, that's kind of courageous, like he just doesn't switch up. He's so consistent with wherever he is to get the work done. I don't know any elders, but I do know that my mom has told me stories about herself and her like brief exchange. She's never told a story more than once. So what I'm giving you is all I got. I remember one time my mom was telling me, I don't know if she was like confessing or what, but she was like, yeah, she briefly was in love with this woman. And I was like, you know, I'm like listening and I'm kind of shocked at her like saying this, but I think we were in the car and she was driving and I was in the passenger seat. So I'm like, ain't like I can, you know, I can't not listen to this. So I'm like, just play it cool. And she's like, yeah, I was in love with a woman. And I think she said it was maybe back around in high school, possibly, or shortly after high school. But I remember she said ultimately the reason that she stopped being friends with the woman was she was just afraid to be out. And it was such a brief story. I don't think that I consciously did anything with it, but I think subconsciously, like me being allowed to just live my life because of how she set me up was saying like, you know, just pick a side, don't be dangerous, don't, you know, don't play with people's lives. Like pick somebody you want to, you know, be with and let that be. My mom big on monogamy. But that's what she was saying, choose, you know, don't be going back and forth between multiple people, just choose somebody to be with. But she tried to confess this story, but didn't give enough context to it. And so I don't know any elders other than my mom who factually was saying like that this had happened, because everything else, like I said, with the generation before me and the one before that, right? My parents and then my grandparents, they're so secretive and they're so not, they're not okay. They don't feel confident enough or even safe enough to share every detail about their romantic interests. So you either saw what you saw or you got a little clips of stories, but no context. And so I can't say that I know any elders who are gay because they live their lives in such secrecy that, yeah, you can't prove it.
I think the question would be like fascinating to ask to the generation that comes after us. I think our generation is right, the generation that now we are almost trying to change this narrative of having to hide who we are because we're not accepted. And I think, of course, we have to thank the elders who have paved the way. But when we think about elders, like, it's interesting we're asking this question because this morning I was reading about James Baldwin.
Right.
And James Baldwin is a gay man, a gay Black man, but that's not how he's talked about. He's talked about this being this, you know, one of the most influential writers in the Black community, you know? So, but he's not talked about, like, they don't talk about how he advocated so much for gay rights and gay, you know, so.
Yeah.
So I think there's one of those contexts of like, we probably do have influential people historically and in our lives, but because of the reality that they had to live during their time growing up, that's not like, yeah.
Right. I relate to that point right there of like there being this because there's so many layers, you know, to everybody. I would say that being a Black person and putting that as the first thing, because that's what society keeps paying attention to first. And then after that, you know, I could identify as saying like, you know, I'm a gay woman. When I was writing that last grant for the Queer Mobilization Fund, it was really difficult to write it because obviously I know who they're looking for and what part of me they would like to hear about most. But it was difficult because I was like, but I'm Black first, and that's what society keeps seeing first, and that's what is at the top of every headline. And you know what I mean? Like that's,
Yeah.
And so like, I was like, damn, writing this grant sounds like I was writing it to the Black Mobilization Fund instead of a Queer Mobilization Fund, because it's so difficult to relate to being LGBTQ on any part of that spectrum when there's layers that society deems comes first. Like that should be acknowledged first, you know, like race.
Yeah.
Not my choice. It's just me assimilating to what everybody else does.
That's true. That's an interesting way to put it, is that we, in some ways, we don't get the choice of what people see first, you know? So if we want to see, well, what's the most important thing about me? And, you know, I might say, well, you know, that I'm a teacher. So that's the most important, or like I'm a parent. But they may say, well, the most important thing about you from society's standpoint is you're old or you're white or you're you're gay or whatever. And so, why don't I get to choose?
Right.
And, but it's not nearly the being white is not nearly the problem, not problem. I mean, most of the world I live in is that's just taken for granted. When I grew up in a neighborhood where, at least a third of my neighbors were Black. People didn't take for granted that you were white or Black. But around here, I feel like most of the people I know in Asheville, it's just, of course you're white. Everybody's white.
Mhm.
But anyway, I just learned something talking to you, that we don't get to, still, we don't get to choose
Yeah, we didn't choose it.
what people think about what's our most important thing. So what do you think about the depiction, like in popular culture or in the world, about LGBTQ people? And then we'll add that other layer, LGBT people of color or different ethnicities. I mean, what do you see out in the world when you see people depicted? You think it's good? I mean, do you think it's accurate, or you
I
think
think
it's
it's a
evolving?
narrow. I think the scope is still like really kind of tight. And because in reality, like I said, in reality, what I really see, like going down to Atlanta that time, I was like, what? Like, I could have I watch a fair amount of movies. Like I pick up a lot from movies and stuff like that. And usually I'm kind of trying to align things, right? Like you said, what am I seeing depicted? And I know that you're saying that in context to what's in reality. Like, and so I just say that it's a narrow focus, because what's out here really, there's not enough of reality being depicted in, on a screen or in a book or in a, even a fucking advertisement. I'm like, they all heterosexual looking people. And I say looking people because I'm like, you ain't depicting them to be anything other than that. And so it's just, and there's so much. And I really like reality. And I really wish that they put more of that on a screen or in a ad. I mean, even just commercials, for crying out loud. I mean, a gay commercial when you see it, because you're like, oh shit, did you see that? It was two guys like in the Pampers commercial with the baby but it shouldn't be that damn obvious, is what I'm saying. And so there's not enough depiction of reality. And so that's my 2 cents.
I think the media does what they want it to do, right? Which is to accept gay white people. I think it's very important for us to name that as gay white people, to be the first, to be those who take the pamphlet. When we talk about Queer Eye, or when we talk about, but Karamo's not white, but it's mostly white people that are in the foreface. Like you just talked about 2 gay men in the commercial. I'm pretty 100% sure it was white men. Like, I don't even need to ask you, but 100%, right?
Yeah.
Right. So I think they do. I think it continues to narrate that white is okay, and that white people who are entering this scope of like, I am openly out and proud, are white men. So I think it does what it intends to do, because I think this brings a racial conversation that still Black people are not accepted, or not that they're not accepted, but still there's a level missing, level playing field missing. That makes sense?
Yeah, I mean, in my own experience, I definitely know what you're talking about. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we could even talk about like what media portrays as like gay men, and the only one I think about that's like in like the media, like in Netflix, is Karamo. But I can't think.
RuPaul and
Oh, that's
We got
right.
Pose now, and so
Oppose?
yeah. Oh yeah, we
Yeah.
love Pose.
So now it's becoming more of that they're out, especially I think this year had a transformative year within Black queer community. So thank you for saying that,
Yeah.
babe. You're absolutely right.
Yeah, and it was so it's there's such a lack of what we're talking about in media that you and I actually drank up all of what was available
In seconds.
in half of a season. You know, like Summer didn't even get halfway through before we watched every episode of
No.
Pose, every episode of AJ and the Queen. And it was like, so what you're asking, I just want to point out that there is a desire for us to have, you know, more depiction of not just what I relate to, but I'm like, I don't relate to being, you know, a gay man or a trans man or a trans woman or anything along this, you know, spectrum, other than just being a Black gay woman. It's the thing that I try to relate to the most when like looking for something on the screen to relate to. But for some reason, Gigi and I, you know, probably just we just want to see more people because we know how many different ones are out there. So we were so thirsty to just see other people other than, you know, just this traditional kind of whatever's on the screen, you know, that we drank everything up really quickly over the summer. I remember that.
It also makes me think about the invisibilization, because it's not that they don't exist and they are portrayed, because let's talk about Tyra Banks, and one of the judges was a Black man. This is back in the 2000s, but was the focus and the attention on this Black man? No. And so I think there's there's something there of the invisibilization of Black gay people.
Word.
I agree. I've enjoyed Pose, but the only thing that's, again, being my age, is kind of painful because the people I know from that time, they're all dead.
Yeah, I was gonna say like that has to hurt. Like I've heard stories about people relating to I met a client, I was a financial counselor in my most recent life. And I met this one client who told me about all her Studio 54. Is that it? What they up in New York?
Yeah, Studio 54.
Her Studio 54 days up in New York. And she is, I think y'all are about the same age, Rachel, that client that I had. And she would tell me these stories. And unfortunately, at the end of it, she was like, most of them are dead. And she would show me pictures with like her and these like renowned like drag queens, drag kings, these trans women, trans men. And she would be like in the center, this heterosexual woman who was just, I told you about that client. That lady was crazy, but she had some stories to tell. And I was just like, I totally, so the reality of it, I heard a little bit about that in terms of being like that era, you know, whether they got sick or they were, you know, murdered, or just lived not the best quality life later. You know, like it's not a lot of people left to tell the tale. So
do you find yourself wanting to seek out elders and hear their stories? Is that
after accidentally hearing some stories from back in the day, and then like I said, getting these little nuggets from parents or, you know, my gym teacher, or I'm just like, I do want to know, like, where's the context? Because it's not blatantly in history, because the first thing that I come to in history is race. And I'm not hearing about their personal lives and that, you know, whether they were great or not. Like, where is it? It matters, like, you know, or you gonna have us all kind of chasing this really sad ass narrative, which is like, it's not just all about race. Like, you know, so much more makes up people. And we don't get to hear about it from that generation because I don't think they feel safe enough to like tell their story, the whole story. Like my mom obviously doesn't feel safe to tell that whole story to me. And I'm like, I'm not judgmental, so I'm pretty sure you don't want to tell the whole, you know, whole country what that story is or whatever. But I just wish people felt more empowered, and I wish that the reality was that they were safe, so that the information is not used against them, or they can just be courageous and say, "Fuck it, use it how you want to use it. I'm gonna tell my story," because at the end of telling your story, it just feels so damn good that you really don't give a fuck who agrees with it or who dislikes it.
Mhm.
It just feels good to tell your fucking story. So I hope that they get that courage.
Well, that's really the focus of this project. I mean, we're trying to talk to all ages of people, but in a lot of cases, it's the elders that those are the stories where that people are afraid to talk about them. One, and two, we're losing them. So those stories are going to disappear if we don't capture them. So
Can I ask you a question?
sure.
That basketball coach, gym teacher, I'm telling you, like, I don't know how they feel today, but it seems like they're more out than ever. That woman deserves to, and I'm like, I can't even say 100% if they would be comfortable with something like that. But I'm like, damn, man, I'm like, you got your name plastered all over every damn thing else. That's relative to her when it comes to sports. That's her blood. That's her second language. But
What's
I'm
her
like,
name?
her name, can I say her name?
Of course.
Oh, it's Sunita Gibbs.
Okay. How do you
She's
spell her
so
first
awesome.
name?
Sunita, like Sonia, Sonita.
Okay, got it. Yeah, so that's one of the questions on the list is, if you got recommendations of other people that you think would want to be interviewed. So that's a good lead.
She's such an influence. I know so many people that are my age. I really believe that they were influenced by Coach Gibbs.
Did you play basketball?
Nah, I was rebellious. I tried to go out for the team and I just suck. I don't have good hand coordination. And then I was like, why are you only playing seniors? And they were like, well, that's the tradition. And I'm like, that's bullshit. I don't want to play. And so I sucked. And I didn't like the way it was structured. But I didn't play basketball. I just admired sports. I was the mascot and I played and I ran track a little bit, but
What'd you run in track?
I would run the 200 because 100 was too short and the 400 was too long. So I could do that straight away in that curve and then I would cave. And I was like fourth string, so I wasn't that good.
I run track now. I run senior track and field.
What do you run?
It's kind of interesting. I did distance for most of my life. Marathons, half marathons, stuff like that.
I felt like that was the case to your upper body. I was like, I feel like you're really tall and you probably got just all the limbs to do distance.
But I got a medical problem that makes doing the long stuff harder. So my kids, I've got two boys and they're both track kids and they encouraged me to try track and field. And so last year I went to the Nationals, Senior Olympics.
What?
Nice.
And I did the 50, the 100, the 200, the 400, and the 800. And
that's short.
I shot in the discus. I never picked up a shot or a discus until about 2.5 years ago. And now I own the South Carolina record for all senior women.
On the discus or the shot put?
Discus.
Wait,
Again, I had terrible coordination. I could not get that thing to spin right.
I'm still struggling with it. I'm not big enough to be good with the shot. It's just, most of the women, like when I play basketball, now I would play with maybe mostly younger people.
Mhm.
Everybody's younger than I am. So, yeah. But the women I play with, like from college, they were all huge, I like come up to their shoulders.
Wow. How tall are you?
5'7".
What? I don't know why. You look so tall sitting down. I'm like.
So Jacqueline's taller though.
I know.
But she's still tall, so she's like my mom's height.
Yeah, we only 5'5".
Well, I was tall enough to be a decent guard, but I played in a league and nobody on my team knew how to play center. I knew how to play center because I used to coach. And so here I'm the shortest, second shortest woman on the team, and I'm playing center. But Gigi, did you play any sports growing up, or did sports have any influence on you?
No, I didn't really do sports. I did like JROTC, like our ROTC. And
Oh,
then I
okay.
did ROTC. So I was more in like military, working out. Yeah. But I did run a marathon and I used to run 5Ks.
Wow, which marathon?
It's called the it's here in Tennessee.
The rugged, no, you didn't do that one.
It's a full marathon for soldiers who have died in combat. Why do I want to say Mountain Man Memorial March? That's not it. I'll tell you right now.
Okay. What? That's not minor. You're saying you haven't done sports, but you've run a marathon?
Right. When I met Gigi, she was still into, I say still because COVID. Sure. Gigi was into working out when I met her, and she would try to make me go to the gym with her. Listen, I am not that girl. And I would just be on the floor trying to do some sort of technical thing and just crying, laughing at myself. But her, just so fit, so right, like, let's do it.
It is called Mountain Man Memorial March. And
Okay.
it's they have different levels. So you could do a half marathon, a full marathon. And I was enlisted to be an officer in the Army. And one of my colonels set aside five of us cadets. And he was like, I think you have the strength to do this. He said, I think you have the strength to do this marathon. And he was like, I've been running this race for X amount of years, and never has there been an all women's team run the marathon. I would like for you to be the first.
Mm.
And we all looked at each other and we're like, and I hate running. I'm not a runner. Right, exactly. Like, but we trained. So we agreed and we trained, and we would wake up at 5 a.m. and we would run 10-mile days, and we would put weight on our backs. We would, work out our legs. Then I was extremely fit. And so at that team, I remember there was 3 all-women teams. And only 2 of us were running the full marathon. What was cool is that not only were we like one of 2, we got 3rd place overall.
Dang.
Wow.
Right.
That's awesome.
And I remember our battalion didn't believe that we could do it. So we had to do a pre-trial in Buffalo. This is where I went to school. We had to do a pre-trial in Buffalo, and yeah. And then one of the sergeants who was training us also did it, and like also came in like 3rd or 2nd place for his age group.
Damn.
The marathon I did was Marine Corps many times.
You did a Marine Corps?
Marine Corps, the Marine Corps marathon in Washington, D.C. It's a big race now. It's just like too big, but yeah.
Well, I would never do it again.
Yeah, I'm not smart enough to say no.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I went from running 5Ks, so that's like a little less than 3 miles for a race, right? I never ran a half marathon. I went from running like a 5K to a marathon. Like that was my in between. And we trained for like 2-3 months. Like we didn't have by far, and I was the weakest link for sure. For sure. I'm like, I have no problem saying that. I was in the back. But I think what motivated me was definitely the other girls, and I couldn't let them down. We had to cross as a team, so they had to work with me.
Wow, that's really impressive.
Yeah. There was a question on here that I actually wanted to talk about a little.
Yeah, I was going to ask you what other questions you'd like to talk about.
There's a question about like um I like lost it, but talking about like my community, like as a Latinx person and like being like a gay person.
Is this it? Right there with the cursors?
That's probably under race and ethnicity. Um, how did race and ethnicity make a difference in how you experience the queer community? Can you describe the social acceptance, rejection you experience from your family and or within the LGBTQ community? Did being part of the GLBT community bring you in contact with people of different ethnic backgrounds? Have you experienced interracial relationships? If yes, what did you learn and how were you received by others?
So I wanted, like, I was thinking about the Latinx community and how heavy patriotic they are. And so because of how heavy patriotism is, for a gay woman, it is harder for us to come out and be accepted than it would be for a gay man. Like there is a little more accepted, still not really accepted, but like a little more accepted. Like, God, that really is a gay man. But if you're a gay woman, you are like hypersexual. Like there is that reality for Latinx community.
So there's just an interesting thing you're saying that the impression of gay women and Latinx communities is that they're promiscuous. Because that's new to me. I've never heard that, or that generalization. But that's your experience.
Yeah, that they were hypersexual.
And you say that it's because it's maybe more patriarchal, that there's more resistance for gay women in the Latinx community than there are for gay men.
I think there has something to do with, of course, religion, because I think is the root of a lot of problems. Well, organized religion, I should say. I was biting my lip. Organized religion and patriarchy, which comes from the organized religion. So right, very, very, yeah. And I think like even like women, like or back from like in New York when I grew up, like women were very much against each other. Like, and I remember this was something that I studied when I'm a McNair scholar. And in the program for McNair Scholar, like it's really just to try to get our doctorate's degree. And one of what I studied was, well, I studied that like women taking women and gender classes, if it would change their view of women moving forward. Because as we grow up, we're so taught to like dehumanize each other. Like, you bitch. Like, and it's almost normal to say that word, and then it's like, well, let's talk about what that even word, like that word is even like for a female dog, that word dehumanizes. And I've had a conversation with so many of my friends and they're like, but that's not how I'm saying it. I was like, but there's still the epistemology. Is that how you say it?
You got it.
The epistemology of the word that doesn't leave. And like, it was so interesting to like talk about this, but I think it's so ingrained that even in the Latinx culture, because it's so heavy male centered, right? Like the men is like, I mean, even if we just talk about who we worship as God, it's the man, So I think there is definitely yeah.
I've noticed.
Sorry, go ahead.
I would say my knowledge of Latin cultures is limited, but one constant is that there's a special in religion. There's a special role for Mary, and in and in the Latin churches. So like the Catholic Church, in the Latin churches, Mary is like revered in a very special way. I was always curious about that, is that here you have a strongly patriarchal culture, but in their religious beliefs and the Catholic religious beliefs in Latin American countries, the Virgin Mary has a very, very special role. And I was always interested as what was that? Well, why was that such an important part of that belief system?
I think it's the maternal aspect. I don't necessarily think there's so much power giving to her besides the power for her to reproduce and be the mother.
Got it.
And that be that for women to then be like, this is who you want to worship, this is maternal, this is who you need to be. But still, nonetheless, who we worship is her son.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I think that has something to do with it.
Makes sense. Yeah, that makes sense. It's, you don't necessarily respect Mary because of who she is, but it's because she delivered.
Right.
Literally.
And so women may not be recognized for all their values, but the fact that they provide and care for children is what their central role is.
Right.
Interesting.
Yeah. And even like, so when we're asking like these questions, the last thing I'm gonna say, and then oh, you baby, is that like, you share like LGBT influences, but I think so much of what's been coming up is that because our identity is so based on being a Black woman, being a Latinx woman, being an immigrant, that being a gay woman isn't who we're like. I think for me, I'm more so seeking out people who are speaking my language, people who are in Latinx communities, people who are doing immigration work, people who are, and I'm not seeking out gay women.
Mm-hmm.
Or like that, that gay community is not necessarily. So, and I think that has to say something, like that has to say, like for me, I think it goes to show the reality that this year has put in our face much more, right? Which is like the racial, the racial.
Yeah, I know, right? What do you call it? Situation.
I mean, I don't even know, right? But like, yeah, from like kids being in cages and, and Black people just being killed, like just because they're Black, and the dehumanization. Like, so I think that has to be that's much more of our part of, for me, that's much more part of my story. I think sharing like that I'm an immigrant, that I had to assimilate, that I left my family, which we don't often talk about. Like, hey, y'all, just think about being an immigrant and all the people that we're leaving behind. And yet y'all have the privilege to have all your family in the United States. Like, you don't think we had to make some type of, yeah.
So one of the being involved in the LGBT community here and allies here in Asheville, one of the burning questions still is what can organizations like Blue Ridge Pride, what can they do to address the issues of people who are Black and Latinx, and where ethnicity and or class and or status as citizen, what can be done? What's the most important things to do to reach out and support people in the community for whom maybe the most important parts of their lives is not the fact that they're in that community. It's about their race or ethnicity or class issues and all that other stuff. So that's, I know that talking to people in both at the YMCA where I work and at university, and then of course with Blue Ridge Pride. What can we do to address the issues and the concerns of people of different backgrounds in the community?
I
It's
think
like
it's
the mother lode. That's what really I think people want
Yeah.
to be able to try to address.
I mean, my personal solution to kind of curing like the big problem I see is like just we got like this issue, the situation of divisiveness, and it's not just like racially. Like people look for all sorts of reasons to kind of click up and separate each other from one another.
Yeah.
And the solution that I typically go with, it's like one of my favorite things to do is just sit down and talk to people, like, you know, like all kind of people, like, and whether that was I mean, it can come easy, you know, if you've been paid to do that, or it can be a little bit of a challenge if you are just personally committing to, you know, sitting down and talking with people and just kind of creating a social culture that wasn't necessarily prepared for you. Like, right, we all just kind of keep falling into what was prepared for us. And that's why I like seeing people, you know, those little odd situations or, you know, encounters that you might see where, you know, one person looks one way and the other person looks a completely different way, and they sitting down having coffee, or they, you know, or they like sharing a plate of spaghetti or some shit, and you're like, that's a weird looking group of, you know, people right there. But that's the whole point. Like, you know, get out and fucking talk to somebody and listen to other people. People that you wouldn't necessarily consider having over for dinner, you should go talk to them anyway. And so that's my solution. That's what I like doing. That's why I like people, is because they generally are comfortable enough or can get comfortable enough to allow me to, you know, be in a space, and like, I don't have no outcome or thing that I'm looking to get from talking to them, other than we should both be able to walk away saying, like, you know, just something to think about. That's it. You don't have to do anything. You experience somebody else's brief reality. And what can Blue Ridge Pride do? They can keep this project going, because that's all this really is. It's just, you know, I got my coffee and you got whatever you need over there. And we kind of just shooting the shit, even though we got some scripted questions. And you know, I don't really care about the product that's gonna come out of this. Like, I care that, you know, you prompted us enough to like hear ourselves, and like a lot of what Gigi was sharing, I was kind of listening along as if like some of these stories I haven't heard before. So like just the opportunity to speak openly and like in a safe space is going to be a product of its own. And so even after the oral history project is done producing whatever you're trying to produce, I think that if somebody can figure out how to keep allowing this to happen, right? Whether it's volunteers like yourself, just continuously searching people out and just hearing from them, whether they do something with the information or not, I think that's a product. I think that it's a helpful platform to just, people have to talk, they have to share their stories, and it's more healing for them to share their story than it is for the person capturing it and who's going to publish it. You got to let people exercise that, because everybody's kind of being told to, you know, shut up because we ain't got enough time, or, you know, there's so many excuses why you don't get to just sit and share your story. So
Yeah, I agree. That's a product in and of itself, just the process. But you know, one of the other things going to happen is that people will get a chance to hear these interviews, or read them, or go into the materials that we've collected and realize that, oh, well, yeah, I've got a story to tell too. It might inspire other people to talk, and also to reach across and talk to other kinds of people. So, yeah, I've had a blast doing this and learning a whole lot. So anyway, when all this crazy COVID stuff is done, I'd like to have you all over for dinner. We can talk some
That'd be
more.
nice. Yeah.
I'm down.
Yeah, I
Um,
love that she sent us like the picture of you and your wife. And like that's really nice. And how you have been together for 20 something years, right?
17.
So-
17. So
like it's something up there. Like, yeah, so
time.
that's nice. Did you see the picture? I showed it to you.
No.
I didn't show it to you.
No.
Oops. Well, I saw it. I'll share it with Anna.
oh, okay. Yeah, we met in 2004 and we got married, like within a couple months of after it became legal. It's kind of a funny story. We were moving down here. So in 1 week, we sold a house in DC area. I retired from my job. She retired from her job. So that's like we sold the house on Monday. We moved out on Tuesday. We got married on Wednesday. We loaded up the truck on Thursday and we drove down on Friday. That was a big week. But
I would have a heart attack.
so we it was small. We just had a few friends over. My best girlfriend and Lauren's best girlfriend. We got together and one of them, I mean, her best girlfriend flew in from Thailand to be there. But part of the story is that my minister, the priest in my Episcopal church, said he was going to retire too. Says, I got to do this before you guys go. We're going to do this. So it kind of came up at the last minute, but it was like his last hurrah and our chance to kind of get this done. So we had a church wedding. It was awesome.
That's crazy.
Yeah, I'll show you the other pictures sometime, but it was fun. He was a really nice guy. He had Parkinson's and he knew that he wasn't going to be able to do that stuff much longer. And so the book at our church, church had been there since 1843. And everybody who got married and every funeral and stuff was all in this book. So we were the first couple. So we had it had husband and wife. We had to scratch out husband and put our names down in the book. So we were the first couple since 1843 that was the same sex couple. So that was pretty awesome.
That's bananas. You gotta, these are the pictures. Wow. Wow.
And so
Beautiful.
there's the two ring bearers there I sort of adopted a woman and her wife and their kids, like as my an extra set of grandchildren, godmother kind of thing. And so they were all part of that. I was in their wedding too, which was a big Jewish wedding. So it was Jewish, two women, both in full white dresses. It was just so beautiful, and one of them's trans, and that was a lot of fun.
Was that in DC? Theirs?
Yeah, that was in DC. So this one woman who's just really dear to me, she's like a big wheel in the CIA, and so she's quite a story. So I worked in the White House for a couple of years. I was they have the Office of Science and Technology Policy and the Science Advisor to the President. I worked for the Science Advisor to the President for a couple of years and two administrations. So I kind of came out when I was at the White House, which was interesting.
I was wanting to. What's your doctorate degree in?
Didn't finish it. My first son came along, and I finished all the coursework, but I'm an environmental scientist, aquatic ecologist, I love working outdoors, and I like doing research. But quickly, I didn't get to spend that much time working outdoors because I became a manager in a hurry. Unfortunately, if you do a good job, they keep you in the office. So I worked for the federal government for 33 years. Worked for the Fish and Wildlife Service, for the Geological Survey, for the White House, for the Department of Interior, for EPA, the Food and Drug Administration, and the U.S. Congress, among other places. So I may go back. If we have a new administration, I may go back and help with the transition team for one of those agencies. We'll see. So I don't want to go back to working full time, but I would go up for like 3 months and help transition to a new administration. So,
Wow, that's cool.
yeah, it's got to be a lot of work. When I worked at the White House, it was 14 hours a day, 6 days a week. It was just crazy. I don't know how people do it for 4 years. I did it for 2, and I was burnt toast. So, well, are there other things that you'd like to talk about that come to mind, and any ideas about going forward and improving the process? And then finally, I'll ask if there's any, like, particularly it would be really interesting if you have any photographs, for example, when you were in did you ever take any pictures at Hairspray, or you've got any materials from the Fresh Air Fund, or experiences there, or just any kind of things that are historical that you'd like to? We'd make
I'll look
copies
for
of.
some.
What?
I'll look for some photographs, and yeah, in those days everything was blurry quality, because you'd be like mid kind of like dance move or something, and somebody was snapping, so all you see is like your face like blurred out and your hands all over the place. Now we'll do our best to look for something to share.
Yeah, I'm like, sometimes the Fresh Air Fund's pages have pictures of me, but I have to
That's
look
cool.
for it. Yeah.
This process has, and to also what you were saying is like, I really enjoyed this process. When you first reached out, I think sometime last year, I was just like, I can't fit this into my life. This doesn't fit in my life right now. I was like, and then when I resigned, I was like, maybe I can follow back up. And I didn't get to do it because I jumped right back into work, and then I quit again. And then Gigi was like, hey, you want to do this? I'm like, fuck, man, that is awesome. Yes, let's do it. Because I wasn't able to go back and pick it up, and then it found us anyway. So that was, I really appreciate how far y'all are spreading y'all's, willingness to do this project. I don't know how many volunteers are working this or who is making this all possible, but it's really cool to hear that you've done 50 of these.
We got a grant through YMCA from the Biden Foundation.
Really?
It's where some of the money came from. So yeah, so the money to have someone take the conversations and put them down on paper. Basically it's like a $1 a page if it's done by a professional organization rather than a volunteer. So that's paid for a lot of the expenses of getting the transcripts produced.
Oh, that's the worst.
Yeah, that's hard, but it's really impressed me is the YMCA's dedication to this. I think I told you the story, but when I first moved here, I went to Pride, and I went by the YMCA, and
what are you doing here?
Yeah, Young Men's Christian Association. Hello. And they go, well, we're trying to do better here. And then the next year I was working there, and some people come by and go, well, why are you all here? And well, because we want y'all means all. I mean, that's the way we think we should operate. And then the next year it was like, oh, you guys are one of the the coolest folks here. So,
Yeah.
so that's, I've been impressed with them. They have struggled. Trying to get more, particularly more Black people in the Y has been a struggle. They feel, at least they feel, they don't feel like they've done a great job and they want to figure out how to do a better job. That's actually been more challenging, I think, than getting LGBTQ people comfortable at the Y. And I just think it's some of the history here. So some of the Ys that are kind of out in the smaller towns, it's still hard to get any kind of different people into the Ys there. So, but I'm really proud of the effort they're making. They really do try hard to do that. And there are a lot of Latinx people there who they have basically gone out and really offered them scholarships to come there and for their kids, and really done the groundwork to try and get them to participate in the Y and its community outreach. So I'm pretty proud of those folks. I'm proud of UNC Asheville. I don't know if you know this. I remember going and talking to them, why there's so much interest at these studies at UNC Asheville. And I talked to the woman who's one of the chief folks in human resources. And I said, well, what percentage of your student body do you think is in the community? And she looked me straight in the eye and she said, about half. I go, what? I said, well, you don't understand how this works. The North Carolina university system, different schools like Chapel Hill's, if you want to be in a fraternity or sorority, you go to Chapel Hill. If you want to be a surfer kid, you go to Wilmington. But he said, but word gets around, if you're in the community, you want to go to Asheville. So, I mean, you just walk on the campus and you can feel it. That's just it's a safe and queer space. So I love working with the people over there. So all three of the principals here, I think, are doing good work, but they all want to do better. So thoughts that you have about how we can improve this process, and if you've got recommendations to more people to reach out who would either want to be interviewed or who would like to be trained to interview, that'd be awesome.
Awesome. Will do.
Yeah,
This was a good opportunity, and yeah, thank you.
You're welcome. I'm going to turn off the recorder for a second because I want to show you something. So any last comments for the recorded session?
There, you asked like how the process, like not how the process, but how Blue Ridge can like continue to do better. And like Anna says something, and I was like, honestly, it's like for us to be able to continue these conversations, and it's also for people to show up authentically. And I think that's so that it's not like small talk conversations, but like, I want to know about your story. Like, I think that's something very important. Very easily do we say we want to know and then really don't want to. So that authenticness is, and then something else that's coming up is also that acknowledgement of who we are and the bodies that we're in. Like for me, like that's important, like, especially living in Nashville, I'm like, what type of white person are you? Like, like to be completely honest, I think that's also, again, for me, important, that acknowledgement of like, I'm in a white body and I understand what that means.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's it.
Right.
So, well, I'll thank you for your contributions to this project, and we'll talk some more. There's a couple things. I did send you the authorization forms, and if you all could sign that, and I'll give the information. I actually need a physical copy of that because that's going to go on file at UNC Asheville Archives. So I'll need you to sign those copies. And then at some point, if you've got things you'd like to share for the archive, like the photographs we talked about or anything like that, if you've got any for example, any of the information you got from song, or you got any information or pamphlets or stuff that you got from the Fresh Air Fund, that stuff will include. And I mean, when you go, it's really interesting when you go into the archives. Listening to the interviews is really great, but if you see a picture, say from like the 60s of a gay bar in Asheville in the 60s, it's just like, well, that's amazing. It's like a window into a world that otherwise people wouldn't know existed.
Right. I like the way you put that. I'm like, that makes me excited to put something in there, because hell, as recent as it was, the place doesn't even exist anymore.
So,
That I was hanging out at, So I'm like, yeah, it would be cool to, flip through something and just be like, wow, that was the club scene in the 60s or the 80s or the 2000s. Or
exactly. And, one of my training, part of my training was I was trained as a historian, and the real history is people's history. It's not about, the president or, famous people. It's about average people's lives. That's the real story of any period of history. So looking at hearing your stories and any anything that's a reflection of your life and your experience, that's the real history.
Mhm.
That's what generations after us, if they want to know what our lives were like, they're probably not going to find it in a textbook. They're going to find it in a resource, something like this, if they really want to understand what our lives were like. So that's why I think a project like this is so important. Well, I'm going to drop the recording part right now, but I don't want you to go away because I want to share something with you.
okay.